Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and you may have noticed that the Republicans had a debate this week. In fact, they actually had two. They had the Varsity League debate, and then they had the main event. Now, I guess I'll save my observations for our next guest, who knows perhaps a little bit more about all this stuff than I do, at least. Christy Setzer, you may have seen her on Fox, you may have seen her on the Kudlow Report, you may have seen her on MSNBC. You've seen her anywhere. It's probably MSNBC, knowing the viewership of this show. She is a communications expert. She does strategy and tactics for progressive organizations. She is the head of New Heights Communication, and she's a friend of the program, I like to think. Christy, thanks for joining us.
Hey, RJ. Great to be here.
So listen, I guess what I started to say, and then I thought I'd run it by you, is, I saw this headline on CNN's website, and it says CNN Republican debate winners and losers. Were there any winners?
It's hard to say. I mean, there were people who sure tried hard. I would actually count Chris Christie among those who came, I think, fully cognizant of his precarious position on that debate stage and seemed ready to bring, what he thought were substantive points and his energy. I don't think he actually did enough. I think Carly Fiorina, obviously, along with everybody else saying this, but I think it's true. I think she helped herself, particularly when she stood up to Donald Trump. I think that was something where kind of women across America really did actually, find themselves nodding in agreement with her when she said, no, everyone, every woman in America heard what you said, Donald. So in that sense, yeah, there were a couple winners.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, look, I felt that Carly Fiorina did do well. That was a great moment, great reaction. But I guess the reason why, I made my kind of snarky comment was that I guess I'm old school in the sense that I really first of all, I like debates to be about the issues. And
Sure.
and I would say if there was a big loser, and I won't ask you to agree with me, but I would say if there was a big loser, it was, first of all, CNN. For not pressing these guys, for letting them say, I mean, Jeb Bush actually said his brother kept us safe, which
Except for that one time.
except
Right.
for that one time, the mulligan, as people are calling it. It's just so appalling. But and then of course the big loser was, I think, when we first talked to you about coming on the show, and of course thanks for coming on. It was going to be about the rise of Ben Carson. Well, Ben Carson really seems to have blown it this time around. And how much of that do you agree? And if so, how much of that was his fault, and how much of it was that they just really didn't feature him?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a pretty low key guy, by nature, it seems. But also, he didn't. Yeah, so he didn't get into the mix. Somewhat of, when you looked at how much time was allocated for each candidate, Donald Trump had way more time than everybody else, and it was because, not only were there so many direct questions thrown at him, but then there were other candidates who were asked to talk about things that Donald Trump had said, and then you would get his react shots, and so some of it, Carson really didn't have a lot of control over because there weren't questions being asked of or about him, right? So he was dependent on him to actually interrupt. And, as you know, when you're on, say, on live television, you're limited in how much, you're actually going to put yourself out there. But he didn't do very well the times that the camera was on him. So that's the bigger issue,
Mm-hmm.
I think, is that he came into it with some momentum, and I don't know that he left with any.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. We're talking with Christy Setzer, a political strategist, and I guess it's an interesting question. How much part of me thinks, well, okay, if he is pulling even, or was at one point, gaining on Trump, shouldn't his exposure be somewhat at parity with Trump's? But is the problem that Trump is whatever he may be as a politician, and I would say he's lousy politics, but it's a problem that for a lot of people he's just great television, so the networks can't resist featuring him even if it's not appropriate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, look, uh, you have to think that part of yes, part of Trump's rise is certainly from the media and his willingness to sort of say whatever, to say these terribly outrageous things that absolutely go viral and get played again and again and again and again. You saw it again last night in New Hampshire when he didn't correct the people who said that the president was a Muslim and he wasn't American. And that made, if you're a television producer, that made for a really great side by side with the moment in 2008 when John McCain did in fact correct that woman who
Right.
said about Obama, he's an Arab. Um, and so yeah, I mean, whether or not he was aware of that moment and how easily it would have played later, he probably was. He probably was.
So I guess that leads us to the question of what do you think they're saying right now in Republican Party headquarters, RNC, wherever, about this sort of persistent, what I would think is persistent nightmare, this waking nightmare of Trump's domination of the media coverage. I mean, I feel like it's got to be horrible for them, and of course, my heart bleeds for them. But uh, could it could it be in fact that I'm wrong and that they're thinking, well, it's bringing a spotlight to their party and its debate, and in the long run it'll benefit them. I know they were appalled at first, but if
Yeah.
they're trying to take him, if they're trying to take him out, a couple weeks ago, Christy Setzer, it seemed as if you could see them trying to take Donald Trump out of the picture. I don't see that
Right.
much anymore. Am I missing something?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think there was a serious pile on this debate too. There's one point where I think, it, that Jake Tapper allowed several different candidates to down the line say basically Donald Trump said this about you, what do you say back to it? Donald Trump said this about you, what do you say back to it? Right? Like they sort of allowed for this pile on. So I do think there's still sort of a very active effort to take him down. I think after the first debate, the Fox one, I can't remember who it was that said it, might have been Lindsey Graham, but said, the good news is that 24 million people watched the debate. The bad news is that 24 million people watched that debate.
Right.
And the same thing here too. 3 hours worth of just scurrilous insults and attacks and just not substantive argument about any variety of problems that are facing the country, and so many moments that where a false claim was made only, as you said, not to be corrected by CNN. The one moment that made me want to stand up and scream the most was when Ben Carson, the doctor, was asked about vaccines causing autism, and he seemed to try his hardest to not knock that down. So you had two doctors on stage, him and Rand Paul, both not trying to knock down that pernicious myth that somehow vaccines cause autism, and in fact another candidate, Donald Trump, being the one who was actively pursuing that myth. So
Profiles in cowardice.
yes, indeed.
Well, Christy Setzer, let me ask you then. So I guess what I was really talking about with the Trump and the Republican Party establishment, I wasn't talking about the other candidates. Sure, right now he's the big target. So if one of them could have taken him down decisively, that would have been a clear knockout victory for them. So I'm not surprised that they piled on him, and I'm not surprised that Jake Tapper did. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised that Jake Tapper did it because, again, good TV. But I'm thinking back to a couple weeks ago. You had all the sort of Republican Party consultants and elders and so on. They were all kind of out there saying, well, knocking Trump, he can't win, and he doesn't deserve to be a serious candidate. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel as if somehow they've gone silent on all that sort of Republican establishment criticism of him. Maybe they felt it was helping him to be seen as the target of establishment criticism.
That could be, or it could be that he's sort of reached that peak moment where there's I don't know if it's a good chance, but a chance that he would actually be the nominee. And then you become afraid to cross him.
Hmm.
And, and I think, well, at this point, an object in motion stays in motion. Up until this point, he has been continuing to gain momentum at every turn. Maybe that was stopped in this last debate. I don't think we have any reason to think that it was. The only thing that may have stopped it was this now competing storyline about Carly Fiorina rising in the polls. So, but to the extent that he stays at the top of the polls for now, not just, a couple of days, a couple of weeks, whatever, but a couple months, um, I think then, there are people who probably in the party establishment who are trying to learn to love Donald Trump and maybe work, within the system instead of from outside of it.
Well, God help them. I guess.
Wouldn't want to be them either.
Well, let's talk about Carly Fiorina for a minute, Chrissy, because okay, she's the flavor of the moment, or she's the rising star, or maybe she's the one that really is, coming to the head of the pack or coming to a position of being able to challenge the Donald. But whatever your opinions on Hillary Clinton, you can say that it's a great thing for women that we have a leading presidential candidate who's a woman. And now, I don't feel that way about Carly Fiorina because look at those attacks on Planned Parenthood and so on. I mean, you've got how can this be good for women? I mean, of course,
Right.
you know what I'm saying, that her policies sure aren't good for women, are they?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think that certainly there will be a point at which people are going to be able to dive down to her policies and say, oh, okay, maybe she's not the one for me, that I might have thought. But right now, she hasn't had to get all that substantive. And so, I mean, there just hasn't been that much of a spotlight on her yet. So, you can think, okay, I kind of like her tone, and you can, see the way that she, took on Donald Trump, and you can see the fact that she's one woman against, 11
Hmm.
other guys on stage, and sort of like that. There just hasn't been too much scrutiny in the national stage yet about her time at HP, the fact that she's against paid parental leave, or just sort of any of her other policies that would be seen very much as anti-woman. And I think, look, for all of Hillary Clinton's troubles right now, when you actually have to line her up against somebody on a policy level, there's just no way that Dems and independents don't come home, because the contrast is just going to be so clear. And that's true with Carly Fiorina, as true as it would be if, Clinton were going to be facing, say, Chris Christie, or, one
Well,
of the other more bullying guys.
and I would flip it also. I would say I can't imagine that women as a group, as a demographic, would be mobilized by a Carly Fiorina running against a male candidate. I just don't think it would be. I could be wrong, but and I think the other thing about Carly Fiorina is that first of all, you were very diplomatic, Christy Setzer, but she ran HP into the ground. She was a terrible chief executive, and that's her only qualification. Her time was just dreadful. We could go into it. The other, and her business model, by the way, and this is a personal grudge of mine, having purchased their products. The business model of HP was basically sell you a cheap printer and then overprice the cartridges so that you have to keep replacing them. So she's basically, she and the other HP executives were ink cartridge salesmen. Yeah, you want to give the country's leadership over to an ink cartridge salesman, I would say she's your candidate. But I could tell you the other candidate I wanted to talk about, because I felt the contrast from last time around, was John Kasich. I've always felt that's the guy that scares
Yeah,
me the most.
right.
He's not, but he seems reasonable, inclusive, warm, the kind of guy, the kind of politician that you think, since most of the American people do not agree with Republicans on the issues, that's a fact based on
Right.
polling, that so they have to get somebody, in my opinion, to have a strong candidate that people say, well, I don't agree with him on everything, but he's a reasonable man, and I can live with him. So
Yeah.
I was worried about him. He had a good moment in that first debate, and I didn't see that this time around. Did you?
A little bit when he did that thing where he said, hey, Jake Tapper, I thought that we were going to be able to talk about the issues here. Um, I think that's certainly the role he's trying to carve out for himself. And I think he just didn't get enough airtime to really do it. I also think, though, the fact that you and I think that he's scary means that he's probably not conservative enough for,
Yeah.
for the Republican primary after it. So he's probably ultimately not that scary.
And right, right, and that leaves God bless a Republican primary process, but that leaves two people in my mind of interest because I don't know, I'm dismissing Cruz and Huckabee. One, it's just Rand Paul fascinates me that he just doesn't have it.
Yeah.
He just doesn't have the mojo. He's not bringing anything. I really thought he might be an interesting potential threat. He's just not there. And then Scott Walker, again, another one we thought was going to bring it. At least I did. Do you see anything there?
So, what I have kind of said all along, and I maybe this still sounds crazy, but is that I think the person who ends up taking the mantle away from Donald Trump, if anybody, is somebody more like a Ted Cruz. I don't think it's somebody who's sort of, you know, interesting in the way that, as you said, like a Rand Paul has a couple of issues where you can say, all right, I don't agree with on everything, but he says some interesting stuff on civil liberties or whatever.
Right.
No, I think that that electorate is angry and somewhat hateful, and they want a fire breather. And if they're not going to get it in Donald Trump, then they're going to get it in sort of a Trump light, a mini Trump. And I think Ted Cruz is actually the person who comes closest to that, as opposed to, someone like obviously Ben Carson is quite the opposite of that. Or even some of these other guys. I think Cruz is the person who ends up coming closest to Donald Trump. And if they can't have the real thing, then maybe they go for a light alternative.
Yeah, that's a great analysis, and I think that maybe Marco Rubio is just too light. He just doesn't come across with the rage momentum that.
Yeah.
And look, Cruz, they all scare me a little bit, but I still think the Democrats will be very strong in 2016 against whoever they pick. But anyway, we'll keep watching and be with some sort of horrified fascination, I guess. And Christy Setzer, as always, great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.